This is Lisa McDonald, and we're going to take just a minute to talk about how you might improve your ACT reading score. Before we talk about how to improve your score, before you can set a goal, you need to know where you are now. So I'd like for you to pull your ACT score report from October or from another ACT test if you've taken one more recently. If you haven't taken the ACT yet, then pull your last Mastery Prep score report and look at your reading sub-score. Then I want you to think about what your plans are after high school. Are you planning to go to a community college and get a certification? By which I mean, are you planning to attend a community college for 2 to 3 years and then enter a career technical field? Or are you planning to attend community college and then transfer to a 4-year college or university? Or are you planning to go straight to a 4-year college or university? In any of those cases, you need to check out the ACT requirements for admission and for scholarship. So let's look at the local scholarship information. Before we talk about how much you can earn, let's talk about benchmark sub-scores and admissions. So if you're planning to go straight to a 4-year university like USM or Ole Miss or Mississippi State, you should be aware that you must meet the ACT benchmarks for all 4 subject areas. So you need at least an 18 in English, a 22 in math, a 22 in reading, and a 23 in science. The reading sub-score, for example, is used to place you in your History 101 class. So if you did not meet benchmark and you go to USM and you have, let's say you have a 20 and not a 22, they're going to place you in a remedial class instead of putting you in freshman history. History is required for all degrees, and taking that remedial class is going to cost you just as much as any other college class, even though it does not count towards your degree. So that's going to eat up time and money that you could spend working on something that would count towards your degree. So I wanted you to understand that meeting these benchmarks is very important for your future. Once you've met benchmarks, you can think about what your ACT score can earn you. So some local institution scholarship information is available for you here. JC starts their ACT scholarship at 21, and they award $470 a semester. Their tuition is $1,875. At a 26, JC will award you full tuition. PRC starts their ACT scholarships at a 19. At which you can earn $350 a semester, and you can see that their tuition is $1,625, so a little lower than JC. They also will give you full tuition at a 26. USM starts their ACT scholarship money at a 21, but they do have a GPA requirement. Their scholarship is higher, $1,250, but their tuition is also much higher, $4,448. So when you're thinking about scholarships, you do want to think about the money that the university or college is giving you, but you also want to think about how much that institution costs. Mississippi has scholarship money for ACT. The Mississippi Eminent Scholars Grant, $10,000 is awarded to anyone with a 29 or better. The MTAG, $3,000, is awarded to anyone with a 15 on the ACT and at least a 2.5 GPA. And then the HELP grant is awarded to those with a 20 ACT whose parents are qualifying low income. And that's a great opportunity. So think about your goals, think about where you're headed after high school, and take just a minute to make a goal for yourself on the ACT reading test. Most people will tell you that it's a reasonable goal to try to raise your score by 4 points. And that kind of depends on what approach you take. All right, once you've set a goal, it's important to know what the test requires and what it consists of. If you've already taken the ACT, you already know all this. But if you have not, you should know that there are 4 passages on the reading test, 3 single passages, and 1 paired passage. They each consist of 750 words, and the Lexile ranges from late high school to well into college level text. So it's tough text. The 4 passages are always of the same type in the same order. The first one's always literary. The second one's always social science. The third one's humanities. And the fourth one is natural science. Before you start thinking about how to improve your score, you need to think about what your challenge might be. And the first thing to check is your reading fluency. Fluency is a word we use to mean how quickly can you read and understand a passage. And your goal in the ACT is to read the passage and understand it in under 3 minutes. That's because you have 35 minutes to answer 40 questions on those 4 passages. And so if you divide the test into 4, each passage has 10 questions. You want to spend between 8 and 9 minutes on each passage and its questions, no more than that. If you read the passage in 3 minutes, that gives you 5 minutes to answer the questions. And that's still working pretty quickly, but it allows you to spend as much time as possible answering the questions. So you need to take just a minute and check how quickly you can read. So that's the first thing I want us to do. I want you to log into your MyACT account, go down to where you see ACT free online tests, and then click launch free online test. Choose the reading practice test and choose the untimed version of the reading test. Then, without looking at the questions, I want you to time yourself reading the passages. So you'll click to passage 1 and set a timer for 3 minutes and read until you run out of time and use the highlighter to mark how far you got. And then click next until you get to passage 2, set a timer for 3 minutes, read until you run out of time and mark where you got with that one. And then do the same thing with passage 3. Set a timer for 3 minutes and read until you run out of time and mark how far you got. So let's look at that. So the literary narrative, as I said, was the first passage. And I'm just clicking to that. I'm going to set my timer for 3 minutes. And then I'm going to read. And then I'm going to pick up the highlighter and mark where I get to. All right. Once I've done that, I can either click next and move through the questions, or I can go over here, and I know that each passage has 10 questions, so I can go to item 11. Now, this is the social science passage, and it is the paired set on this practice test. The paired set is usually one of the informative passages, so it might be the second, third, or fourth one. It's the second one on this test. So I'm going to read this one. I'm still trying to get through it in 3 minutes. And then I get into passage B on this one. I get to about right here, I mark it. And then I'm going to move to passage 3. And that's my humanities passage. And I'll do the same thing, set a timer, and read until my timer goes off. So take just a minute and do that, and make a note of where you got to on those passages. All right. Once you know whether or not you can finish the passages, then you know what path to take. If you can finish the passages, pay close attention when we talk about the reading actively tips. You're going to want to mark up your passages as you read. If you were not able to get through the passages in 3 minutes, then you need to think about skimming and reading actively. Skimming means, trying to get to the meat of what you're going to have to answer questions on. You're going to have to talk about the main idea of the passage, the main idea of paragraphs, important characters, important people and events, things that that you might face test questions on. So every time you approach a new passage, you always read the blurb, and I'll show you what I mean by the blurb in just a minute. If you're skimming, you want to make sure you get through it in no more than 2 minutes. When you're scanning the literary text, and that's always passage 1, you stop to read the names of characters and places, so you can accomplish that by looking for capital letters. And stop to read any dialogue. So you might look for quotation marks, you might look for italicized words for dialogue. And then the remainder of the text, passages 2 through 4, those are informative. So when you're scanning those, you want to stop and read the first and last paragraph, stop and read the first sentence or 2 of each middle paragraph. Whether you're skimming or reading, so whether you can read in 3 minutes or you can't read a passage in 3 minutes, Make sure you are reading actively. There are tools on the online version of the test where you can mark up the passage. Again, always read the blurb. And when you're in the literary passage, which is passage 1, look for and mark characters in setting. Again, you're looking for capital letters to accomplish that. Dialogue, look for quotation marks, look for italics, and read that. Look for descriptive words and phrases if you can pick them out quickly, and then figurative language and unusual vocabulary. When you get to passages 2 through 4, which are informative, one more time, always read the blurb, and I'll show you how important that is in just a minute. Then look for and mark, whether you're skimming or you're reading, the main idea, and you're going to find that in that first and last paragraph. And that's why even if you're skimming, you need to read the first and last paragraph. And then the main idea of the middle paragraphs, you're often going to find that in the first or second sentence of those paragraphs. And that's why you stop and read those sentences. Pay attention, if you can, to transition words and phrases. Those are going to point out relationships between ideas. And then if you can notice figurative language and unusual vocabulary, you know you're going to have items that question that. So we'll talk about items in just a second. But let's go back to the first one. So by reading actively, I'm going to make use of my highlighter, and I'm going to try to get through the passage as quickly as possible, no more than 3 minutes, whether I'm skimming or reading word for word, and make notes of things that seem important. The blurb is this, the first little bit. It's not a lot, but it gives you more information than you might think. So it tells you what the passage type is, literary narrative. Tells you the title of the original piece of writing. It was called Rough Water, so I already know this passage is going to have something to do with water. I know it was written in 2008, so I already know that the language is not going to be old unless it's set a long time ago. It turns out that it's not. So rough water, and then the first sentence tells me something about races. So I've got water and races so far, and the USA Junior Nationals. And then Miss the Cut, regional meet. So I think we're in swimming land. 0.3 of a second in the 500-yard freestyle. So all of these times seem important. The next day on a Sunday near Houston to do a time trial. It's informal, it's unadvertised. Short flapping sprints. I decided to swim the 1,000-yard freestyle. I had 15 seconds. I had to cut 15 seconds to qualify. So I moved through the passage, marking everything that seems important. About 600 yards in, my coach starts the pace. Then a boy unfolded his legs and started to cheer. He points to the pool. That's where he's going. So I continue to move through, marking anything that seems important. Dialogue, time periods, dialogue, anything. And that's called passage mapping. And so all I'm doing there is just activating my brain while I read, trying to stay focused on what I know is important about a story. I can do the same thing with my informative passages. We're going to take a slightly different approach on the informative passage sets, but just for the sake of passage mapping practice, again, you always want to read the blurb. That's this first little part, and notice how much information it gives you. So it's a social science passage. It was adapted from a book called Apple, A Global History. So a book that's about the history of the apple. And then the second one is from the article, The Fatherland of Apples. So this passage is about apples. And I know that before I even start reading. And again, as I start reading, I move through mapping. So I know a date, a man, and that he's Russian. I know that he's in Asia. I know that he is seeing apples. And I know that he thinks it's the center of the origin. And then if I'm skimming, I'm just reading those first couple of sentences in each paragraph. And I see an important idea there. I see an important idea there. So it's holding true that the first sentence has that probably the important idea of that paragraph. And I move through the remainder of the passage mapping like that. So take just a minute, go back, start with the literary one. You can click previous or you can just go to item 1, which you know is the first passage, and take some time to practice mapping your passages. Practice with the literary narrative and then at least one of the informative passages, passages 2 through 4. And next we'll talk about how to approach the items. All right, now that you've had some practice with passage mapping, you're going to need to move through your questions in a certain manner if you're struggling to get through the test in the time. So again, it's just like the reading fluency. If you're able to finish the passage and all the questions in under 9 minutes, then you probably don't need to attack your questions in a certain order. But if you're struggling to finish all the questions in under 9 minutes, then this is a technique that might help you. So you're going to have a timer going when you're taking the test. So glance at the timer and note the time. Make sure that you keep yourself under 9 minutes and then move through the questions looking for your easy questions first. So those are going to be your one word or short phrase vocabulary questions. They're going to point you back to a specific line or they're going to point you to a paragraph number. You make sure you reread those lines, including a few lines above and below. So let's look at what that looks like. So here we are back in the literary narrative, and I've removed all my highlights, but hopefully your passage mapping will be there when you're at question number 1. However, when you flip to the next question, your mapping may disappear. You're still going to flip through looking for questions that refer to specific line numbers or specific words. And usually they're not the first question or not even the first few questions. So we get to question number 6 and we see that it says, based on the passage, the end that narrator mentions highlighted text. So instead of a line number, since your own line, it's going to highlight the word or phrase that it's referring to. Most likely refers to his, and you look at your 4 choices: final pursuit of fitness, last chance to qualify for the junior nationals, memory of his final Friday night practice, ultimate realization that he had defeated the other competitors in the race. Swimming I had long understood as a constant choice between the now and later, exhaustion now for the sake of fitness later, all those Friday nights spent in the pool in pursuit of an end that seemed always one step further on. I was out of laters. This was the end, and I made my choice. I cashed in the energy I set aside for climbing out of the pool and unfolding my towel and tying my shoes. I've never sprinted harder in my life. I hit the wall. All right. So the end he mentions, does it refer to his final pursuit of fitness, his last chance to qualify for junior nationals, memory of his final Friday night practice, or the ultimate realization that he had defeated the other competitors? You should be able to pretty quickly choose after reading above and below that phrase that this is his last chance to qualify for junior nationals. And you move through looking again for things that refer to a specific part of the passage, and we find another one. That's where you're going. Now, hurry up can be most directly attributed to. So let's read above and below that. Then a boy from a rival high school, whom I hardly knew, unfolded his legs and climbed down from the bleachers and started to cheer. He squatted low to the water, pointed his finger toward the end of the pool as if to say, that's where you're going, now hurry up. So can we attribute that quote to the cheering boy as he verbally criticizes, the cheering boy as he shouts encouragement, the narrator as he speculates about what the cheering boy means when the boy points at the pool, or the narrator as he angrily contemplates his response. All right, so it's this. He's speculating about what he means. He just pointed at the end of the pool, and the words that are in italics are inside the narrator's head. So that's 8. And we have one more reference to a specific part of the passage, and that's number 10. So 3 of the 10 questions point you back to the passage. If you can answer those first, you should be able to answer them pretty quickly. When the narrator heard jump in his mind while swimming, he was most likely remembering. All right, you're going to answer this one correctly. You don't just look at the highlighted question, you look up above it and notice that the word jump appears up here in a flashback. So it's pretty tricky, but if you're looking at this and you glance up and see this, you should be able to come up with the right answer. He was most likely remembering when he hears the word jump in his head while swimming, his teammates' command the day the narrator caught the flag line, his own shout as he leapt off the outdoor pool's deck that fall, the cheers of the boy from the rival school, or the abrupt start of his race that Sunday. Now, if you skim too quickly, you might not have gotten this one, but if you need to reread, you know where to read. So this paragraph is talking about a time in the past when he caught a flag line by leaping out after he heard his teammate call out jump. So the correct answer is that. There's no perfect way to attack the ACT, but when it gives you a specific place to look, you know that you can probably find that answer by rereading. So easy questions first. Next, you want to attack the medium questions, the questions that ask you about how the author uses whole paragraphs or sections to achieve a purpose. And so you may have to reread that paragraph or section and use process of elimination. The test has some test-taking tools. We're going to go back to item 1. The narrator of the passage can be best described as a swimmer who primarily, and this is the passage as a whole question, so we're skipping it. Which of the following events mentioned the passage happened first chronologically? That one's tricky. All right, the narrator describes the natatorium as being nearly empty of spectators the day of his race. And this is an example of how you move around on the test and your passage mapping disappears. But if you did that work, you remember that the reference to him being the only one in the only one in the natatorium is right here. And so if you need to reread, you can. He describes the natatorium as being nearly empty of spectators the day of his race in order to illustrate that the perfect racing conditions the narrator had hoped for weren't likely to occur, demonstrate that contrary to the narrator's expectations, the meet was energetic. All right, so there are some tools you can use, and one of them is the answer eliminator. And I think it's pretty safe to say that the meet is not energetic if he's the only one in the natatorium. Explain why the narrator's coach paced at the sound of the horn. Well, that happens down here. And it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the natatorium being empty. So it's pretty easy to rule out B and C on this one. And you're left choosing between the perfect racing conditions or the rush of energy. And since he says he's angry and disheartened, I would say the best choice is that the perfect racing conditions that the narrator had hoped for were not likely to occur. So that's an example of one where if you've mapped the passage, you'll be able to go back to a specific place and answer it. 1,000 yards freestyle is another one where if you've mapped the passage, you know that you're looking right here. And so you can look back at the passage and read to answer that question. So you work through easy, then medium, And then last, you look at the hard questions, and those are going to be like the ones that I've skipped so far. So look for keywords in the question that you might be able to use to find where in the passage that you read that. And that is only going to be possible if you do the work of mapping the passage when you're reading and skimming, marking those important words and phrases. Using the process of elimination and the answer masking tool that I just showed you can be helpful when you're answering these hard questions. If you run out of time, if you check your time when you get to the hard questions and you're still under 8 minutes, then answer those questions. But once you reach 8 minutes, you need to pick one answer, and that's going to be your answer of the day, and mark it for all of the questions you need to skip. So either the first, second, third, or fourth answer, mark that same one for every question you skip. That's going to give you a 25% chance of getting the question right over the course of the whole test. That's true of all of the tests. If you have to guess the same answer choice on English, math, science, and reading. You are trying to make time for yourself as you move from one passage set to the next to get to the easy questions. That's why you work the easy questions first, because you're trying to get those right. And then you save the hard questions that might take up a lot of time for the end. You do not lose points for guessing. Again, pick one answer position for the whole test and mark it for every answer that you don't know or don't have time for. All right, paired passages are a little bit different. With a paired passage, you're going to read passage A and map it, and then answer the questions that go with that. And then read passage B and map it, answer the questions that go with that. Then at the very end, you're going to answer the paired questions or the synthesis questions. So let's look at what that looks like. We've already learned that the second passage is your paired set. It's your social science passage. And so I read it and mapped it. But as an example of how to map a passage. But let's look at it now a little bit differently. So you know to always read the blurb. You're going to read passage A and then answer the passage A questions. So the first one's about passage A, the second one is, the third one is. Then it moves to passage B, and the screen takes you down to that passage. Then you read passage B, map it, and answer the passage B questions. So the majority of the questions on the paired set is asking about either passage A or passage B. Then you're going to have a couple of questions about both passages. So again, read passage A, answer the passage A questions. When you get to the passage B questions, read passage B and answer those questions. Then answer the questions that ask about both passages. Do these passages just like you do the others, where you read and map, whether you're skimming or reading word for word. And just like the other difficult questions, when you get to the synthesis questions, the questions that ask about both passages, make sure you use process of elimination. Use the answer masking tool to help you make your way through the test and be as smart as possible about choosing your answer. So that's the best I can give you on how to improve your ACT reading score. However, the very best tip would be for you to make sure you spend some time every night between now and the test reading something difficult, something informative, because 3/4 of the test is informative. And then, maybe writing some summaries or answering some questions. There's a lot of ACT practice that you can find online to get some practice with the question types. I wish you the very best. I know you're going to do well. Let me know if I can help you.